Has her ladyship gone out for a stroll? A maid asked as she and two others chatted outside the Thisse castle, one morning. She's been taking these outings quite often lately, the second maid remarked. The weather is exceptionally clear today, a rarity in Thisse. It would be a shame to stay cooped up inside, said the third maid. Well, it can't be just the weather, the second maid said, drawing the attention of the others. What do you mean? The first maid asked her. Whenever she goes out alone, she always comes back with his lordship, she tells them. Now that you mention it, they do seem to have grown quite close, the second maid said, almost happily. Yes, they do. I remember when she first arrived at the castle, their relationship didn't look so promising, the first maid agreed. That's not entirely surprising, considering the rumors about the affair between His Grace and Marchioness Isabella at the time, the second maid noted. And then there were the accusations against Her Grace for the Marchioness's murder, the third maid added. It must be that they fell in love when His Grace saved her from a death sentence. That's quite romantic. I would have fallen for him too, the second maid said. No, I'm quite certain it happened well before that, the first maid said thoughtfully. What do you mean? The third maid asked in surprise. I mean they were in love long before that incident, the first maid explained. I'm convinced they fell in love well before the incident, she tells them. Meanwhile, in the Duke's private forest, him and Chloe spent their time together. Why do you insist on being so stubborn, Your Grace? Chloe asked him. That is simply who I am, he replied, biting into an apple. I asked you yesterday to refrain from interrupting my picnic, Chloe said, adjusting her buttons as she dressed. Dear. Has it never occurred to you that you might be disrupting my duties? He asked, almost jesting. No, I cannot say it has. And how shall I put this? I don't think it's necessary to try so often to conceive, she said, her face turning red. Chloe, do you think I'm doing this for the sole purpose of having a child? Duke Damien asked, leaning closer and gently touching her hair. Well, naturally, Chloe replied, almost stumbling over her words. Ensuring the birth of an heir is one of our foremost obligations. And I must make it clear that I am not inclined to engage in activities that lack a distinct purpose. I see. All I seek is a pleasurable time with you, my wife. Regardless of our purpose, the more attempts we make the better, he said, unbuttoning his shirt as they began to kiss again. Unbeknownst to them, Gillis was hidden at a distance, watching them. Chloe, lost in the moment, heard the rustling of leaves and turned her head toward the sound but saw no one. I think there's someone there, she said, her voice barely audible as Duke Damien kissed her neck. It doesn't matter. Don't pay them any mind, Chloe, Duke Damien replied, laying her gently on the floor. When you are with me, and even when you are not, I expect your undivided attention. That is the duty of a duchess, he said, leaning closer to her face. Yes, my lord, Chloe whispered before they kissed again. If someone were to ask Chloe what she valued most about her husband, she would pause for a moment before answering. Perhaps his exceptional planning skills? Chloe said to her maid Margaret, while holding a cup of tea. Pardon? Margaret asked, looking puzzled. He always keeps me informed about his whereabouts and promptly notifies me if anything happens, Chloe explained. My lady, surely you can't mean that's his greatest strength. Besides, the example you gave seems to have little to do with planning, Margaret said, clearly surprised. Well, I can't think of much else, Chloe replied with a smile. If you were to ask me about his flaws, though, I could list many, she thought. My lady, doesn't your heart soften when you see the fiery passion in his lordship's eyes? Margaret asked, her eyes bright with admiration. It's more often that his eyes remind me of frozen lakes, Chloe said coolly, taking a sip of her tea. But he returned within just 5 days after setting off for the royal palace, riding back quickly to be with you. Margaret said, trying to paint the Duke in a romantic light. Well, his business at the palace probably concluded sooner than expected, Chloe remarked. My lady, I assure you, that's not the case. He simply cannot bear to be apart from you, even for a moment. Do you know what they call this? This is what they call love. You seem to be the only one who doesn't see it, Margaret said, clasping her hands as she observed Chloe with a hopeful look. Laugh? Chloe thought, her face flushing slightly as she pictured the Duke's smile and the way he called her my wife. No, that can't be. He's incapable of such an emotion, she thought, shaking her head. Oh, that reminds me, my lady, have you heard? Margaret said, stepping closer, causing Chloe to tense up. What is it? Chloe asked, trying to remain calm. One of the other servants told me, Margaret said, leaning in to whisper details to Chloe. Chloe's mouth fell open in shock. Her teacup slipped from her hand, falling to the ground and shattering. What? What did you just say? Chloe asked, her voice trembling with fear. Chloe tried her best to limp faster as she made her way in haste through the woods, heading for Gillis's cottage. Margaret's words echoing in her head as she walked. My lady, have you heard? Gillis has decided to resign. Despite his lordship's assurance that he would overlook the incident mentioned during the trial, it seems Gillis felt uneasy about staying. I was told he's taking a train out of Thisse this evening. He appears to be in a hurry, Margaret informed Chloe. Why would he leave so suddenly? What on earth happened, Gillis? Chloe thought, her face troubled. At Gillis's cottage, he was surprised to find Duke Damien waiting for him. Why are you still here? Did I not make it clear that you were to leave once the trial ended? Duke Damien asked, seated with his arms folded. There was something I needed to be sure of, Gillis replied. And what was that? The Duke asked. I had to be sure that you would not harm Lady Chloe, Gillis said. Duke Damien watched him silently for a moment before breaking into a laugh. He stood up and walked towards Gillis. How insolent. Truly, you do not know your place, he said, grabbing Gillis by the shoulder. Gillis tensed, watching him. Duke Damien's smirk vanished as he suddenly punched Gillis in the face, causing him to crash to the floor. Gillis lay there, coughing and in pain. Gillis, what oh, my intuition did not fail me. From the moment I first saw you, I felt a strong sense of distaste. The look in your eyes, your demeanor, your manner of speech, all of it irritated me, Duke Damien said angrily, grabbing Gillis by the shirt and lifting him against the wall. Suddenly, Chloe burst into the room. Your Grace, please put him down, she pleaded, causing Duke Damien to flinch and turn toward her. Chloe, Gillis said amidst the pain he felt. Ha! Is this what you wanted? The Duchess's sympathy? Or were you hoping for one last secret rendezvous? Duke Damien said, gripping Gillis's shirt tighter. Please stop, Chloe begged, dropping her walking aid. Step aside before you get hurt, Chloe, Duke Damien demanded. Your Grace, Chloe called out, limping closer. Duke Damien paused. Chloe Von Thisse, do not test my patience. Move aside, he said harshly. Gillis, gathering his strength, managed to kick Duke Damien hard in the leg, freeing himself from the Duke's grip. He clutched his neck, trying to catch his breath. You have no right to speak to her ladyship that way. She will not tolerate insults from anyone, he said, his voice firm. Judging by your reckless babbling, it seems you do not value your own life, Duke Damien said, cracking his knuckles and preparing for a fight. Your Grace, Chloe shouted, stepping between them with her hands raised, trembling. Please stop. I beg of you. He helped me. He testified at the trial to save me. He is incapable of lying, yet he lied before God for my sake, she pleaded. It was not a lie that he spied on our most intimate moments, Duke Damien said, bending a knee. Gillis bowed his head. You and Gillis fabricated those details to defend me, Chloe exclaimed. No, Chloe. Do you remember our picnic in the birch forest? Duke Damien asked, causing her to freeze in shock. If you were to discover the identity of the servant who had been spying on us, would you still stand up for him? He questioned. Was that you, Gillis? Chloe asked sharply. Gillis trembled. I was merely, he stuttered, unable to continue. I'm afraid you will not be able to hide behind a mask of loyalty, Gillis. Your intentions are all too transparent to me. Boys like you are so eager to idolize others, always seeking a love that brings nothing but agony. But do you recognize the flaw in your yearning? You are fantasizing about a love that will never come to fruition, Duke Damien said with a smirk, taking Chloe's hand. Because Chloe Von Thisse is already mine, he declared, pulling her gently to himself. Let us go, Chloe, he said softly, assisting her as they walked away. Gillis remained silent, watching them with a pained expression. He is wicked to the core. He is the devil incarnate, he shouted, tears welling in his eyes. Back at the castle, Duke Damien helped Chloe to her bed. Your Grace, I swore I would be faithful as your wife. Gillis is nothing more than a good friend. Though his actions were wrong, they did not warrant driving him out, she said, but was interrupted by the Duke. Do not mention another man's name in my presence, he warned. But he is a highly capable servant. It's thanks to his efforts that we survived this unforgiving winter, she insisted. Do not speak of him as if you hold him in high regard, the Duke snapped, causing Chloe to grip her dress tightly. Then what do you want from me? She demanded, but received no response. Chloe watched him with a stern gaze before turning her head away. Please leave before I come to despise you further, she said harshly. The Duke stared at her but complied with her request. Why is he so insufferably self-righteous? Chloe wondered as she sat on her bed, clutching herself. She remembered Margaret's earlier words about the Duke being in love with her. Laugh? She thought. You wouldn't act like this in front of someone you love. Chloe lay down, berating herself. Chloe, what were you expecting? The Duke is incapable of genuine affection. You're such a fool, she said inwardly. Later that night, Duke Damien entered her room, placing her walking cane beside the bed before climbing onto it. He gently took her hair and whispered in her ear, Chloe von Thisse. I chose to leave you alone today out of respect for you as my Duchess. I have to say, you upset me quite a bit. I suggest you refrain from siding with other men if you know what's good for you. It has thoroughly soured my mood. Now I bid you good night, my wife. He kissed her cheek and left the room, closing the door gently behind him. Inside, Chloe's heart raced. What on earth was that about? She wondered, her eyes wide open in the darkness. A few days later, Duke Damien invited Chloe to his room. Your Grace, I was not aware that the duties of a duchess included taking over for your attendant, she said, eyeing his shaving tools with confusion. My attendant's cough is quite severe. I cannot be expected to keep a sick person by my side. What if I were to contract an infectious disease? He replied with a laugh. Your Grace, Chloe said with a sigh. Yes, my wife? Duke Damien replied cheerfully. Not trimming your beard for one day will not adversely affect your impeccable visage, she tells him. It's been quite some time since I've heard such flattery, he chuckled. Chloe, he said calmly, stroking his chin. Yes, Your Grace, she replied calmly. I am hungry. You'd best hurry, he said smiling. Chloe, her expression quivering, began to shave the Duke, carefully gliding the blade against his chin. You're good at this, he remarked. I asked you to refrain from speaking, she replied, her tone clipped. They fell silent as she worked, gently brushing against his chin. There is no task that my wife cannot excel at, he said, observing her closely. You will be dismayed when you look in the mirror. I've made a complete mess of it, she said, finishing her task. Excellent. I like it when you're a mess, he responded, causing her to pause. I, however, do not like being in disarray, she said firmly. That is none of my concern, he replied. You've always insisted that I perform my duties to perfection, yet now you say you prefer it when I make a mess. I truly cannot fathom what you want from me, she said, wiping her hands with a cloth. What I want, Chloe, is to see your perfect self fall to pieces before me and me alone. I want you to care about every detail of my actions and make foolish mistakes as a result, while longing for me to embrace you despite it all, he said. Chloe looked at him, her voice soft yet firm. Allow me to ask you something, Your Grace. Go ahead, he said. Do you love me? Chloe asked, causing Duke Damien's eyes to widen in shock. Please answer me, Damien. Do you love me? She pressed. Duke Damien was silent for a moment before letting out a gentle laugh. Is that not what you want? For me to whisper in your ear that I love you? He asked. If your actions were motivated by love for me, I would try to forgive you, Chloe said. Forgive me? He asked, rising from his shaving chair and approaching her. I am sorry to disappoint you, but I do not need your forgiveness, he tells her. Your Grace, if I cannot forgive someone, I cannot love them either, she replied, causing his eyes to widen in shock. What do you mean by that? He asked, surprised. Please answer my question first. Any answer will do. All I ask is that you be honest with me, she said, turning her gaze away from him. Duke Damien struggled to find the right words. He placed his hand over hers and stroked her face gently. From the moment I first saw you, I wanted to claim you as mine. If the desire to make you mine can be called love, then I have been madly in love with you for a very long time. 1,000 times I love you, Chloe Verdier, he said, his voice sounding calm but serious. Chloe watched in shock, unable to respond immediately. I think it will all be fine now, she said calmly. What do you mean? He asked, puzzled. I will be all right if you see me become a complete mess, she said, her face turning red. The Duke stood in shock, watching her flush. The prospect of it excites me, he said, taking her hand. Everything I did to mold you into Chloe von Thisse is slowly melting away with the arrival of spring. As they found themselves together in the Duke's bed, Chloe thought, the moment I realized his true feelings, which I had not expected to be love, my frozen heart began to thaw. She let herself get lost in the moment. At the train station, Gillis sat waiting for his train. A voice called out, You there, aren't you the servant who works for House Thisse? Gillis looked up to see Lord Weiss. Lord Weiss, Gillis exclaimed, recognizing him. So you remember me? Lord Weiss said with a smile. Greetings, my lord, Gillis responded with a bow. Your name was Gillis Watteau, wasn't it? Where are you off to? Lord Weiss asked. Oh, I've decided to leave House Thisse to embark on new ventures. Some unfortunate events occurred, Gillis said, his voice tense as he kept his head bowed. I see. What a pity. Still, considering you did His Grace a great favor, he must have sent you off with a splendid letter of recommendation. He is deeply grateful to you, there's no doubt about it, Lord Weiss said happily, touching Gillis' shoulder. Do you really think so? Gillis asked calmly. Of course. After all, he has been in love with the Duchess for a very long time, and you played a significant role in saving her life, Lord Weiss revealed, causing Gillis' eyes to widen in shock. I was unaware that Master had loved her for so long, Gillis said. I do not blame you. He has always had a rather peculiar way of expressing himself, Lord Weiss replied with a laugh. But they got married so suddenly, Gillis noted. Rest assured, my dear boy, the Duke is not one to approach such serious matters as marriage impulsively. He likely spent a good year, or even 2, planning for this marriage, Lord Weiss assured him. Ah, that reminds me. If you did not receive a letter of recommendation from Lord Thisse, what do you think of working at the monastery? My mother is there at the moment, and she says they have been short on labor lately. I hope this can at least provide some consolation for your troubles, Lord Weiss added excitedly. Gillis considered the offer, still bowed as he observed Lord Weiss. This man might be able to confirm my suspicions. He thought. I thank you for the offer, my lord, but Gillis said softly before being cut abruptly by Lord Weiss. What is it? Is something troubling you? Lord Weiss asked, noticing Gillis' hesitation. Yes. I find it difficult to understand why His Grace would frame Lady Chloe for murder, subjecting her to such suffering. Therefore, I wish to avoid working at any place associated with him, Gillis explained. How did you know about that? Lord Weiss asked, his expression tense as he flinched slightly at Gillis' suspicion. Gillis clenched his fists in anger. So my suspicions were justified. Duke Thisse, he thought, his anger rising. It was only a strong suspicion, but you've just confirmed it's true, he said through gritted teeth. Just what does he intend to do to Lady Chloe? He wondered inwardly, despite his growing fury. My lord, does your offer to assist me in finding employment still stand? Gillis asked, bowing politely. Lord Weiss, feeling the weight of the situation, thought, I fell right into his trap. If Duke Thisse learns of this, it will undoubtedly lead to trouble. Since this young man knows the truth about the murder, it would be wise not to drive him away to a place where I cannot keep an eye on him. He glanced at Gillis, tense, and decided, yes, I should keep him close. Indeed, it still stands. So, will you come with me? Lord Weiss asked Gillis. In the city, Chloe walked gently toward home. I wrote to father for the first time in a while. I've been receiving letters from a post office in the south, so I sent one there as well, even though I don't have an exact address. I hope it reaches Alice, she thought, determinately clutching her envelope. I see now that this is undeniably beautiful. It feels completely different now that spring has arrived. When I first came here, winter seemed endless, and I never imagined growing to love this place. I now feel as comfortable here as I did back in Verdier, she thought, her face beaming with joy as she admired the beauty of this. How serendipitous. Were you having a pleasant afternoon, my dear wife? Duke Damien said, wrapping his arm around her waist. Chloe turned to meet his gaze. I recall you saying you were occupied, she said. I concluded the meeting early. I couldn't let my business keep me away when my wife is out and about on her own, he replied, causing her face to turn red. Your face has gone red, he remarked with a laugh. It's a warm day, Chloe said, turning away and trying to hide her flushed face. Now, what do you have there in your arms? Duke Damien inquired. Oh, it's nothing, Chloe said, quickly hiding the envelope behind her. It doesn't look like nothing to me, Duke Damien said. I assure you, it is of no interest whatsoever, Chloe said with a smile, thinking, I must never let him see it. Back at the post office Chloe had just visited, the attendant showed her a collection of stamps. Your Grace, would you like to see these? These are stamps commemorating our victory in the war 2 years ago. They were so popular at the time that there was even a shortage. This is the last remaining set. Would you be interested in purchasing it? He said, displaying a stamp featuring Duke Damien. Chloe observed them silently. They are merely stamps with images of Thisse strawberries. I found them quite charming. The stamps were designed to mark the summer solstice, and as Duchess, it is only natural for me to take an interest in such matters, she said, trying to hide the truth. Strawberries, you say? Duke Damien asked, sounding doubtful. Yes. Truly, it is of no importance, she said, but was cut off as the Duke quickly snatched the envelope from her. Excellent. I'm quite fond of strawberries myself, he said, opening the envelope. My lord, please give that back. Chloe protested, trying to retrieve it. How can I possibly suppress my curiosity when you're acting like this? He said, examining the contents. In an attempt to retrieve the envelope, Chloe accidentally knocked it from Duke Damien's hand. The contents scattered and fell into a nearby fountain. Oh, Chloe exclaimed, distressed. Oh dear, since when did my face remind you of a strawberry? Duke Damien asked, staring at the stamp with his image. Your face is quite the picture of disappointment. You can simply buy more, can you not? He laughed, finding her reaction amusing. Feeling embarrassed, Chloe tried to hide her disappointment. It's completely natural to feel disappointed after losing something you've paid for, she said, her face turning red. She knew those stamps were the last remaining set. Shall I retrieve it for you? Duke Damien asked. It is too late. Please, forget about it. In fact, I was practically forced into buying them, Chloe said calmly. But Duke Damien rolled up his sleeves and jumped into the fountain. Chloe watched, perplexed, as he reached for the stamps in the water. Your Grace, what are you doing? Please come out at once, she begged. There's no need to make such a fuss. Look, I have it right here, he said, smiling as he emerged drenched. You got yourself wet. There are people watching, Chloe said, noticing the onlookers. Despite seeing me daily, my wife purchased stamps featuring my face. This is the least I could do for her in return. Would you not agree? Duke Damien said happily. He leaned closer to her ear. It now occurs to me that there is a perfect place just ahead. Shall we take a quick rest there? What do you say? He whispered, causing Chloe's face to turn red. The couple soon entered the hotel nearby. They sat in a cafe, sipping tea. I didn't expect the ground floor of the hotel to be a cafe, Chloe said. Why? Was there something else you were hoping for? Duke Damien asked. Of course not, Chloe replied, her face flushing. I see, he said, resting his chin on his hand in a teasing manner. The reason I'm out and about is that I had an urgent telegram to send at the post office, he continued. A telegram? Chloe asked. Have you not heard the news? Duke Damien asked, his tone becoming serious. News? Chloe inquired, sounding unsure. Duke Damien leaned forward, his expression intense. Chloe, this concerns your father, Viscount Verdier. Do you remember the woods where we first met? It was the forest I requested from your father as a dowry. I'm sure you've heard that a gold mine was discovered there. As a result, Verdier Castle is in a festive mood. However, since that forest fell under my possession when we married, Verdier will not benefit from the mine. Yet the Viscount has not mentioned this to me. He is far too humble for his own good, Duke Damien said, his dissatisfaction evident. My father is not the type of man who would be upset by such matters, Chloe said, her gaze fixed on the table. Duke Damien observed her closely. Chloe, the telegram I sent states that Viscount Verdier will receive a 50% stake in the gold mine. Both you and your father could stand to be a bit more ambitious, he said, taking his seat. Thank you, Chloe replied calmly. Then serve me a piece of that cake with half a spoon of buttercream and half a spoon of chocolate mousse, he demanded. Chloe lifted a piece of cake, her hand shaking slightly as she added the buttercream. She fed it to him. The Damien special. That's the proper way to savor cake, though my mother never could stand it, he said, savoring the taste. Tears began to drop from Chloe's cheeks. Chloe, why on earth are you crying? Duke Damien asked, sounding surprised. Oh. I'm not quite sure. I just don't understand, she said, trying to wipe the tears from her eyes. Do you know how silly you look right now? Come, let me see your face, Duke Damien said with a smirk. I refuse. You mean to taunt me, she said, still hiding her face. I would like to see you, he said, gently holding her hand, causing her to look up at him. Chloe held his hand, her tears now a sign of happiness. They were tears of pure joy, she told him. Duke Damien watched Chloe quietly, his attention focused on her words. I thought such words were reserved for our bedchamber, he said, planting a kiss on her hand. Now I'm curious. How would you have reacted if I had given your father the entire mine? Pardon? That is not what I meant, Chloe said, her face flushing. In any case, I am very grateful. I do not know how I shall ever repay you, she added sincerely. Are you really that fond of me? He asked with a teasing smile. Your Grace, she called, her face red. The couple walked through the city. As they approached a bridge, Chloe asked politely, would you care for more of the Damien special? I no longer need it, he replied. Why is that? She inquired. Well, I have found something I like much better. Your sweet flattery, he said with a smile. Chloe blushed as she watched him. Your Grace, have you heard? She asked calmly. What is it? He responded. They say that lovers who share a kiss on this bridge will never leave each other, she said before they kissed. A few days later, they attended a performance at Swan with Lord Wyse. Is this your first time at a Julian Wyatt performance, your ladyship? There's a good reason why his Grace is a patron. Do you enjoy music as well? Lord Wyse asked. Yes, I do. I used to play the piano quite often when I was in Verdier, Chloe replied. My, now I'm intrigued, Lord Wyse said with a laugh. That's enough, Wyse. Stop pestering my wife, Duke Damien said. Pester? I was only trying to help her relax, Lord Wyse responded. And why would you think she needs that? Duke Damien asked as Johannes Swain walked in. It has been a while, my dear cousin, he said, drawing their attention as he stood behind them. Your Highness, I trust you have been in good health, Chloe said, drawing his attention. She rose and bowed slightly. Lord Wyse followed suit, but Duke Damien remained seated. Belated congratulations on your marriage, Duchess, Johannes said. I was deeply honored to receive the royal family's congratulatory message, Chloe replied politely. Duke Damien took her hand. Please, take a seat if you've finished greeting him. Your legs must be tired, he told her. Your Grace, I do not understand, Chloe began, startled by his request. Johannes watched in awe. I almost don't recognize you, Damien. You seem to have undergone a complete transformation since your marriage. I did not expect you to become such a devoted husband. As I recall, you were never like this with Marchioness Isabella, Prince Johannes told him. Marriage has a way of bringing about many changes, though that may be difficult for an unwed man like yourself to fully appreciate, Duke Damien said with a smile. Oh, you are making me jealous, Johannes exclaimed. Please do visit the palace more often to enlighten me on the wonders of conjugal life. In fact, why don't you send the Duchess over to the palace? We are about to select a lady-in-waiting, he tells Duke Damien. Lord Wyse tensed and remained in a bowing position. Chloe thought, there's so much tension in the air. Duke Damien stepped up from his seat, approaching Johannes slowly. It was but a jest, Damien. Do you really think I would do that to you and your wife? After all, you are my dearest cousin and most loyal subordinate, Johannes said, with a devilish grin, placing his hand on Damien's shoulder. What the devil are you talking about, Johannes? Duke Damien shouted, drawing everyone's attention. Chloe flinched, looking stunned. What did you just say? Johannes asked, his expression tense and surprised by Damien's outburst. I suggest you shut that mouth of yours before I wring your neck, Duke Damien added, his tone serious. How dare you, Damien? Johannes retorted, his anger evident. Now, this is how you make a proper jest, Your Highness, Duke Damien said with a smile, turning to Johannes. Later that evening, Duke Damien was alone in a room, smoking a cigar. Your Grace, where is her ladyship? Lord Wyse inquired. I sent her ahead to the train station, Duke Damien replied. So, you saw assassins inside the theatre? Lord Wyse asked. Yes. There were 3 of them, and it was clear they had been sent by the royal family. A sign of desperation. Prince Johannes's public appearance today likely had an agenda. His intentions are not difficult to deduce. He wanted to show me that he is healthy and thriving, Duke Damien said, extinguishing his cigar in the ashtray. They say the king's health has worsened, so Johannes must be feeling agitated. Do you plan to stay at Castle Rose in Swain for the time being? Lord Wyse asked. No. I shall return to Thisse at once, Duke Damien replied. Your Grace, if it is not absolutely necessary for you to go back, would it not be best to remain in Swain to monitor developments? Lord Wyse suggested. Seeing the way Prince Johannes was acting today, it seems I cannot stay here. The summer festival will soon begin in Thisse, Duke Damien said, putting on his gloves. The summer festival? Lord Wyse asked in surprise. Yes, my wife is to select the best strawberries at the event, Duke Damien replied. Ah, I see. Her Grace is too, Lord Wyse began, before reflecting on what he had just heard. Did you say strawberries? He asked in shock, looking tense. At the train station, Chloe sat waiting. She recalled Duke Damien's earlier instructions. Go ahead and wait for me at the train station. There are matters I must attend to here. If I do not come in time, you may leave for Thisse without me. The tension was palpable today. Chloe reflected on how her relationship with the royal family had already been strained due to the incident with Marchioness Isabella. Perhaps I should have stayed with him, she thought, clasping her hands on her dress. Your Grace, has his lordship not arrived yet? A coachman asked as he approached her. My apologies. He assured me he would be here on time, Chloe replied, though she felt uneasy. Where is he? She wondered. As night fell, someone approached Chloe softly. What are you doing here? Why have you not left? Duke Damien asked, causing her to startle as she met his gaze. His expression was tense. I was waiting for you, she said. Where is the train? He asked. It has departed. I could not inconvenience the other passengers solely for your sake, she replied, rising from her seat. That is a privilege of the nobility. Were you unaware of that? He questioned, puzzled. You chose to wait here alone in the dark, exposed to all kinds of dangers. What were you thinking, Chloe? He asked, still holding his head in confusion. I waited for you because I was worried. I am not so heartless. I couldn't bear to leave my husband behind after such a difficult encounter with the prince, she explained. Chloe, he said gently. Yes, Your Grace? She responded. The last train to Thisse has departed, but a train to Verdier will be arriving soon. Since it's too late to return to Thisse tonight, I suggest a brief detour to your home first, he proposed. Chloe's eyes brightened, and her cheeks flushed with color. Inwardly, Duke Damien was concerned about her being alone in the dark. I'm sorry for getting angry. Thank you for waiting for me. Though you may not express it straightforwardly, I've grown fond of your unique way of expressing how you feel, he thought as he watched her move closer. I would love to, Damien, she said excitedly, hugging him. As the train journeyed towards Verdier, it rattled gently along the tracks. Inside the compartment, the couple shared tender moments, their affection evident. Duke Damien, looking flushed, reached for Chloe's legs. Just when my life's ambition seemed within reach, I ended up boarding a train to win your heart, he thought as he held her passionately. You need to know just how much I love you, Chloe, he said softly, planting kisses on her thigh. You can be surprisingly tender sometimes, Damien, Chloe replied, her face flushed. Your mother was right, she added, lifting his face with her hand. But you need not know all the dirty details of the matter, he thought, observing her serene expression. In a letter from her father, Chloe read. To my beloved daughter, Chloe. My dear, how was your journey back to Thisse? I could not help but shed tears of joy upon seeing you board the carriage with your husband. Your unexpected visit and your happiness felt like the most splendid gift. And, my daughter, do not be surprised, but your mischievous younger sister sent along a portrait, Lord Verdier wrote, referring to the portrait of Alice holding her baby. I have a feeling it will not be long before we all gather as a family. I have heard that the summer solstice festival will soon be held in Thisse. How wonderful it would be to live each day as a celebration. My sincere hope is that you will savor your present happiness to the fullest. I love you, dear Chloe, her father concluded. Your Grace, Chloe exclaimed, placing her hands against Duke Damien's chest in an attempt to resist him. What is it? He asked, looking displeased. Your mother will be here any moment. We should stop now, she insisted. But I know for a fact that you enjoy it when I get carried away with you, he replied, causing her face to flush red. We really don't have time, she said, but he resisted her, kissing her as he pressed closer. Ah! Please, Your Grace, wait, Chloe begged, her voice tinged with a soft moan. Chloe, what on earth is taking you so long to get ready? Damien's mother asked with a sigh, opening the door. She gasped upon seeing Damien on top of Chloe. Oh my, Damien, she said awkwardly, not minding them. Good morning, mother. I needed some encouragement from my wife for the upcoming race, Damien said, turning towards his mother. Chloe turned her head away in embarrassment. Yes, I'm sure Chloe's efforts this morning will pay off, his mother said with a giggle. I will not disappoint you, mother, Damien assured her. Like mother, like son. They don't have an ounce of shame in them, Chloe thought, feeling tense as she hid her face from her mother-in-law. Tell me, how did you find judging the strawberries? Damien's mother asked Chloe as they walked outside with her holding an umbrella. It was the summer festival. I was rather nervous. I'm not particularly comfortable being in front of such a large audience, Chloe admitted, sounding a bit shy. I would never have guessed, given the enthusiasm you displayed, her mother-in-law exclaimed. Well, it is my duty as Duchess, Chloe said to Lady Thisse. Ah, there he is, Lady Thisse said, drawing Chloe's attention to Duke Damien. Chloe's eyes widened in surprise to see him outside without a shirt. Are you surprised? His mother asked, turning to Chloe. Well, he does seem rather lightly dressed for competing in a running race, Chloe said, turning her flushed face away. The race soon began, with the men running furiously. Chloe, Damien is quite a difficult man, isn't he? Lady Thisse remarked. He has always been ambitious since he was a boy. Our father always said that a touch of ambition was the key to success, Chloe agreed as they watched the race. In Damien's case, he may have too much of it. I tried to be a role model for him when he was young, hoping he would develop a sense of loyalty to the royal family. But children rarely grow up as their parents intend. If His Majesty were to pass away with the prince's reputation in shambles, it would profoundly impact Damien. In fact, the entire world around him would change, his mother said. Your Grace, is there something you would like to tell me? Chloe asked politely, halting her steps. Perhaps she will be different. No one was able to change Damien. But she, Lady Thisse thought, closing her umbrella. The bell rang loudly, followed by cheers from the crowd. His Grace has won. People shouted, seeing Duke Damien leading the race to the finish line. Chloe, I have only one request to make, Lady Thisse said, drawing close to Chloe. Please, do not become a source of weakness for Damien, she added, watching the happy Duke wave at Chloe from a distance. Are you enjoying the festival? Duke Damien asked Chloe as they walked together along the field. Yes, very much, she replied. How was your time with my mother? He inquired. Chloe hesitated before answering. I can tell she loves you very much, she said, stepping ahead of him. That's why she sometimes makes mistakes out of fear. Even if she seems ungracious at times, I hope you'll understand, Duke Damien said, catching up with her. Your Grace, do you ever experience moments of fear? Chloe asked. I would never admit to being afraid, even if I were seconds away from a bullet, he replied. Yes, of course, Chloe said with a sigh. I'd rather die laughing than be remembered as a pathetic, trembling coward. That way, you'll never forget me, he said, taking a strand of her hair, placing it next to his nose, and savoring its scent. Around them, ladies ran about, plucking flowers and laughing with one another. Chloe watched couples dancing, falling quiet as she observed. Your Grace, I've been diligently practicing walking with the brace you gave me, she told him. As she saw people kissing, she fell silent. One day, I shall present you with flowers like those women over there. You see, I was told that during this festival, it's customary for women to pick flowers while stepping backward and present them as gifts, she said, her cheeks reddening with happiness. Is that so? I look forward to it. Not once has a woman given me flowers, Duke Damien chuckled as he helped Chloe sit on a bench. Perhaps it wasn't that they didn't want to, but that they couldn't, she replied, causing him to flinch. Why is that? He asked. Their lives could be ruined if they got on the wrong side of you, she said with a light giggle, teasing him. Why would you assume I would ruin the life of a woman confessing her love for me? How ludicrous. What on earth do you take me for? He said, sounding hurt. Chloe observed him calmly, reflecting on their relationship. Who is this man I've married? Our first encounter, when I thought he was the most arrogant man in the world. Our first kiss, which felt like waves crashing against a cliff. And a proposal that seemed like a threat. How many times has my world been turned upside down since meeting him? I'm afraid of what else may come my way if I stay with him, she thought, just before raindrops began to fall. Oh dear, it's raining, Duke Damien said, reaching his hand out to feel the raindrops. Your Grace, I would like to be your strength. Your mother told me I mustn't become your source of weakness, Chloe said suddenly, unfazed by the rain. Do you wish to be my weakness? He asked calmly. No, she replied. A weapon. Are you declaring your intent to join me on the battlefield? He asked her. The couples in the field dispersed, laughing gently as they went. Duke Damien placed his hand on her head. Life itself is a battle, isn't it? Especially for someone like me, she said, surprising him and reminding him of their first encounter in the Verdier forest. Duke Damien remained still, his hand resting on her head. I know you will always fight for me. That's why I intend to do my very best to support you and ensure I am never a weakness to you, she said, her gaze fixed on the ground. Oh, and Chloe began, but Duke Damien interrupted her by gently caressing her cheek. He leaned in and kissed her, silencing her. Chloe, allow me to say this, you have never been a source of weakness, not even for a moment. That's how it has been, and that's how it will always be, he said, before kissing her again under the rain. Soon, some ladies began playing in the rain, while Duke Damien and Chloe sat together, watching them with amusement. Did you know that many people born in Thisse have birthdays close to one another? Duke Damien asked. It must be because their parents became lovers during the midsummer festival, Chloe replied. Precisely. Passion is contagious. So, my wife. As Duke and Duchess, we must lead by example, he said, rising from his seat and offering her his hand. Chloe's walking cane rested on the ground as she stood, facing him. Everyone around stopped to watch them. I'm feeling bashful, Chloe admitted. Why is that? He asked, sounding concerned. Well, I've never danced in front of so many people before. Not to mention, my dance skills are lacking. I'm afraid they'll mock me, she said shyly. Chloe, no one will dare mock you as long as I am by your side, he said, lifting her into his arms. Chloe's face turned red with surprise. How do you feel now? Are you less embarrassed? He asked. He gently set her down and took her hand, leading her in a slow dance. Chloe slipped and fell, but Duke Damien caught her and held her close. Chloe looked down at her feet, then took off her shoes. Damien watched puzzled, as she stood barefoot on the grass. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, I'm fine, she said, placing her arms on his shoulder. Damien took her hands once more, and they danced gently in the rain. Chloe looked happy. Damien. Thank you. she said. Just then, the rain intensified, and people began running for cover. For what? Duke Damien asked. Thank you for persuading me to dance. And I'm sorry for declining your invitation to dance at Castle Rose, Chloe said excitedly. He embraced her closer as the rain soaked them. Chloe, the rain is getting stronger, he said. Your Grace. The carriage is ready. Their coachman called out. Damien. I want to keep dancing. I would like to keep dancing. I want to keep dancing with you, Chloe said eagerly. As you wish, he replied, taking her hand as they continued to dance in the rain. As the carriage moved, Duke Damien gently undid Chloe's dress. Dance, Chloe. Move for me, and for me alone, he said, his voice filled with desire. Chloe panted as she moved rhythmically on his lap. Damien, Damien, please, Chloe moaned softly. Damien responded with tender kisses. Ah, please, Damien, Chloe gasped, reaching her limit. I love you, Damien, said the Duchess, he told her in bed, reminding her of her words. When did I say that? She asked, her face happy. Just now, he tells her before embracing her. 3 months later, Chloe was at the castle while the Duke was away. Are you quite sure? She asked a physician eagerly. My lady, His Grace has arrived, a maid announced. Duke Hugo stepped into the parlor. Your Grace, there is something I must tell you, Chloe said, rising from her seat excitedly. Chloe, Duke Damien began, his tone somber, His Majesty the King has passed away. Chloe looked at him with concern. The news is being kept secret for now, but an official announcement will be made soon, he said with a sigh, his hands folded. Now, what was it you wished to tell me? He asked. The doctor took a bow and said, You see, her ladyship is with child. Duke Damien's eyes widened in amazement. Ah, he exclaimed, dropping his hand and focusing his gaze on Chloe. Damien? Chloe called, her hand resting on her tummy. I cannot believe His Majesty remained firm in naming Johannes his heir until his final breath, Lord Wyse remarked, conversing with another count on his estate. Indeed, but Duke Thisse's actions puzzle me more, the second man responded. Why delay seizing the throne until after the national mourning? With Prince Johannes's madness already exposed in the Red Veil, the people have turned against him. Why hesitate? The Duchess is with child, Lord Wyse explained. If the Duke acts rashly and falters, it's not just his life at risk. If her safety is his concern, we could increase protection, the Count offered. Do you think I haven't suggested that? Wyse replied tense. And what was his response? Those without wives should keep their opinions to themselves. The Count paused, then added, but remember Wyse, this marriage was part of his grand plan to claim the throne. True, Wyse nodded. He even ordered Lady Alice, the Duchess's sister, be drawn into scandal, though she fled before it could unfold. I thought his choice of House Verdier was to keep the royal family's eyes off him, the Count mused. And to control the minds. He used Lady Isabella to play up his image as a womanizer, married the Duchess, and dodged royal scrutiny. Didn't His Grace also mention discovering gold in Verdier during the war? The Count asked, not noticing the faint noise nearby. Lord Wyse started to speak but stopped, hearing something. Did you hear that? He asked, confused. It's probably just a cat, the Count said dismissively. Regardless, we must follow his orders for now, Wyse sighed as they moved on. Still, I can't help but worry, the Count muttered. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner, Gillis clasped his hand over his mouth, heart pounding. What on earth did I just overhear? He thought, his face pale with terror. Oh, how adorable. The color is so lovely. Margaret exclaimed, watching Chloe knit a tiny pair of baby socks. I chose something neutral since we don't yet know if it's a boy or girl, Chloe replied, her attention still focused on her knitting. His lordship will be overjoyed, no matter the gender. It's your first child, after all. Margaret said cheerfully. Do you really think so? Chloe asked, her hands steady, but her mind elsewhere. I'm not so sure, she thought to herself, recalling a conversation with the Duke. This will be your first and final pregnancy, Chloe, Duke Damien had told her with a grave expression. Pardon, Chloe had asked, sitting on the bed, sadness clouding her gaze. But if I don't bear you a son, you'll have no heir to succeed you. Chloe. He had moved to sit beside her, his voice stern. I don't like to repeat myself. One child? Does that mean he's confident it will be a boy? Chloe wondered, her mind drifting back to the present, her fingers moving methodically over the soft yarn. When do you think his lordship will return from Swain? It's been a fortnight since he left, Margaret asked, breaking the silence. It's a busy time, Chloe replied, just as a knock interrupted them. Come in, she said. My lady, a visitor has arrived, the butler said, stepping in. It is Lord Chelsea, House Thisse lawyer. Chloe's brow furrowed as she looked at the papers the lawyer presented. Are you certain His Grace personally dictated these words? She asked, skimming the document. Yes, my lady. I transcribed every word faithfully, without omission, Lord Chelsea affirmed. Chloe's eyes lingered on the will. He intends to bestow the name Thisse and the title of Duke upon our firstborn, regardless of gender? That's not permissible under current law, she said. His Grace has always opposed Swanton's inheritance laws. And as your ladyship knows, he keeps his word, Lord Chelsea replied. I know, Chloe said quietly, gripping the paper as her face flushed. He would break the law if it meant ensuring our child doesn't lose anything. Lord Chelsea then placed a letter and a necklace on the table. His Grace also asked me to deliver this to you. Chloe unfolded the letter. To my dear Duchess Chloe von Thisse, I would like you to begin making preparations to come to Swain. I had planned to wait until our child's birth next spring, but my yearning for you surpasses my patience. Hoping to see you as soon as possible, Damien. My lady, you've been positively beaming ever since his lordship's letter arrived, Margaret remarked during tea, placing the tray down with a smile. Is that so? Chloe asked, her voice calm, though her cheeks flushed slightly. Yes, you seem more at ease than ever before, Margaret observed. I was worried he didn't want the child, but it seems my fears were for nothing, Chloe thought, feeling some relief. My lady, if you go to Castle Rose, I would accompany you, wouldn't I? Margaret asked excitedly. Of course, Margaret, Chloe reassured her. I've never been outside Thisse before. I'll finally get to see theatre performances. Margaret exclaimed, her eyes bright as she clasped her hands in joy. Your dream is to be an actress, isn't it? You could even audition in Swain if you wish, Chloe said with a soft chuckle, picking up her teacup. Ah, that reminds me. Lily, the kitchen maid, went to visit her family in Swain and spotted Gillis at a store, Margaret said suddenly, causing Chloe to freeze for a moment. Gillis, in Swain? Chloe asked, surprised. Yes, he was dressed as a monk, but Lily was sure it was him. He told her he's working at a monastery run by Count Weiss's mother, Margaret added. Weiss? Count Weiss is Damien's closest confidant. Damien wouldn't have arranged this, and Gillis wouldn't willingly take a job connected to House Thisse. What could have led to this? Chloe wondered. In any case, we'll see him once we're in Swain, Margaret said cheerfully. I never got to thank him or apologize. If I see him in Swain, I'll make sure to say everything I didn't before, Chloe thought to herself. My lady, please excuse me. I need to take these to the study, Margaret said, gathering some papers. Do you mean those documents? Chloe asked. Yes, the steward asked me to sort them. I've still got a lot to do, including cleaning up the study, Margaret explained. I can take them to His Grace's study for you, Chloe offered. Pardon? My lady, you shouldn't overexert yourself, especially in your condition, Margaret said, looking worried. It's all right. This is the least I can do to help my husband, Chloe replied with a smile. In Duke Damien's office, Chloe carefully placed the documents on his desk, her fingers brushing the papers as she thought. Perhaps Damien did have a hand in securing Gillis's job. Gillis was always there for me, and Damien is the kind of man who repays loyalty. He can be surprisingly loving. Her gaze drifted to a large portrait of the Duke. Limping slightly, Chloe walked over to it, her hand gently tracing the painting's surface. Damien, I miss you very much too, Chloe whispered as her eyes lingered on his portrait. Something caught her attention, a small object dangling below the frame. What is that? She wondered, reaching for it. As she tugged gently, a hidden compartment opened, revealing a secret safe. A secret safe? Chloe murmured, her curiosity piqued. She cautiously opened it, revealing piles of documents inside. Damien doesn't seem like the type to hide things, she thought, hesitating before deciding to take a look. Maybe just a peek, she told herself, pulling out a few papers. Flipping through, she realized they were all related to his business dealings. What could have made him conceal these? She wondered. But as she scanned further, she froze upon seeing a map of Verdier. Why Verdier, she wondered, her fingers trembling as she unfolded a letter attached to the map. The contents left her stunned. Following an examination of the samples sent by Your Grace, it has been determined that the mineral unearthed along with the sand is gold. It is highly likely that its source is a mine in the Verdier estate. Viscount Verdier is on the verge of bankruptcy. If his second daughter fails to secure a suitable match, Castle Verdier will be lost due to insurmountable debts. This letter. It's from 3 years ago, Chloe whispered in disbelief, her heart pounding as she continued to read. In response to your inquiry regarding his eldest daughter, she is skilled in medicine and excels in managing the servants. She has long given up on marriage due to her condition. Chloe's hand fell limp, the papers slipping through her fingers. He knew about me all along? She thought, tears brimming in her eyes. My love, came a familiar voice, breaking her trance. Chloe turned to see Duke Damien standing at the doorway, his face damp, droplets of rain still clinging to his hair. I took the last train because I couldn't stand being away from you any longer, he said softly, his voice gentle as he noticed the tears streaking down her face. His eyes flicked to the documents scattered around her. If you have questions, I will answer them all, Damien said, stepping toward her, his gaze unwavering. It continued to rain outside as the room remained still. I don't wish to think about anything right now, Chloe said softly. Chloe, I told you to ask me questions. Ask me what those documents mean and why I did it, Duke Damien said, stepping closer. Chloe kept her gaze on the floor, silent. Chloe, don't you want to know the truth? He asked calmly. She bit her lip as tears began to fall. Since you insist, I'll ask. Was the murder of the Marquise part of your plan? She asked. I didn't kill her, he replied, still composed. Then, were you the one who framed me? Chloe asked, her voice trembling. Yes. I only did it because I love you. I wanted your heart, so I took it. Resent me if you wish. Scream at me, strike me, I will take it all. We are married, he said, his hand brushing her cheek. Disagreements are part of marriage. Don't let your emotions cloud the truth. And what truth is that? Chloe asked, her voice shaking. That when we first met, it was the glint of gold that caught your eye, not me. That you only intended to use my father, who thanked you endlessly. Or that my own husband, who claimed to believe in my innocence, let me stand trial in that chilling courtroom? Her tears flowed as she turned away. No, Chloe. None of that matters. The truth is, I love you, Damien said, locking eyes with her. Chloe, her hand tightly gripping the documents, let them slip to the floor. Did you kill His Majesty too? She asked quietly. I did, Damien confessed. He protected his twisted son, and I couldn't let a man like that rule this nation. If my son were like that, I'd have executed him myself to save his honor. Better to die with dignity than live in shame, he said coldly. Enough. Chloe cried, slapping his hand away. Chloe, he called out, noticing her trembling. Chloe's vision blurred as she felt a sharp pain. Blood began to run down her legs. Chloe! Damien shouted, rushing to her as she collapsed. He caught her, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. As she lost consciousness, Damien's voice grew frantic. Chloe! The baby is unharmed, but it would be best for her ladyship to rest fully for the time being, the doctor said as she finished attending to Chloe in her room. Duke Damien remained seated beside her as the doctor quietly left. Chloe lay still, her back turned against him. Your Grace, she called softly. Yes? He replied. You must have pressing matters to attend to. Perhaps you should return to Swain, she suggested. There is no task so important that I would abandon my ailing wife, Damien replied firmly. I wish to be alone. Please leave, she said calmly. If you want to spare this bed from being stained with blood again. Ever since it became clear that your pregnancy was affecting your health, I found no joy in the life growing inside you, Damien said coldly. Damien, Chloe whispered, clutching her stomach. Please leave at once, she insisted. As you wish. Rest well, he replied before leaving the room. The moment the door closed, Chloe began to sob. Everything unfolded according to his plan. He's a calculating man. He must have known how far I'd go for those I love, she thought, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, my baby. I'll protect you, she cried, her voice trembling. Outside, Damien stood silently, listening to her sobs. He must have known I'd find strength for their sake. But I'll keep you safe, my little one. I promise, Chloe whispered through her tears, clutching her belly. The spread of the epidemic from the south is quite concerning. How unsettling that such an event should occur so soon after the king's funeral, Lord Weiss remarked as he stood in Duke Damien's study. Indeed. Is there an update on Johannes? Duke Damien asked, still writing at his desk. Despite the chaos, he was determined to proceed with the coronation ceremony as quickly as possible. Johannes was resolute about moving forward, but when his attendant collapsed from the disease right before him, he fled to his villa on the outskirts of the capital, Lord Weiss replied. There are also rumors that the prince has aligned himself with the Duchy of Katar. If he seeks their support to strengthen his claim to the throne, it could complicate matters. Damien continued writing, though the weight of the conversation hung heavily. Your Grace, Lord Weiss asked cautiously, is your hesitation to act because of the Duchess? He studied Damien closely. The Duke paused. There has only ever been one reason for my hesitation. You value family above all else, and I do not want you to see me as a man who murders his own kin, he thought silently. But the time for restraint had passed. Let us prepare to rid ourselves of Johannes, Damien finally said. Are you certain, Your Grace? Lord Weiss asked. If you would prefer not to act directly, I could. No. Damien cut him off, rising from his seat. I will end his life myself. It's the last courtesy I owe to my cousin. He glanced at Weiss. So that you must admit to yourself that you love the kind of man I am, he thought, his mind thinking of Chloe. Later, Duke Damien hosted his vassals at the Thisse estate. I am honored you have stayed so late, Your Grace, Lord Weiss remarked, observing Chloe nearby. The honor is mine, she replied softly. Once His Grace departs, he will be absent for a while. As Duchess, it is my duty to remain by his side while he's still here. I know how much His Grace cares for you. I'm sure he will conclude his business in Swain swiftly and return without delay. In the meantime, focus on your health, not your concerns, Lord Weiss said, smiling. Concerned? His Grace always executes his plans with impeccable precision. I have no reason to be concerned, Chloe responded, forcing a smile. Damien smirked, his gaze steady. It seems the woman who has become the most unpredictable factor in my life holds me in rather high esteem. You flatter me, Chloe said, her voice calm but strained, prompting Lord Weiss to cast an awkward glance between them. In any case, Lord Weiss interjected, trying to shift the mood, His Grace's child will grow up in a world vastly different from our own, wouldn't you agree? He asked his neighbor. I'm already looking forward to it, the man beside him replied. That sentiment holds true for all of us, doesn't it? We've all been waiting for the change. It will have been worth the wait, Duke Damien said, raising his glass. Chloe watched him thoughtfully. Not everyone desires change. Some are perfectly content with the world as it is, she remarked quietly. Even if that change is for the better? Damien asked, his gaze turning to her. And who decides what better means? Chloe countered, meeting his eyes, though she felt a wave of dizziness creeping in. Damien studied her. Chloe, are you all right? He asked. She tried to rise, feeling faint. My apologies, but I must take my leave. Her words faltered as she collapsed to the floor. Damien rushed to her, catching her just in time. Chloe, what's wrong? Answer me. He shouted, panic in his voice as he held her limp body. Chloe was laid in her room, unconscious, while the doctor examined her. Duke Damien remained by her side, refusing to leave. At present, there's no definitive cure for the disease, the doctor explained cautiously. We must pray that Her Grace can fight it off. Were there not reports that a certain drug could alleviate the symptoms? Duke Damien asked urgently. When Her Grace briefly regained consciousness, She was adamant that no drug be administered that could harm the child, the doctor said. Treatments effective against this illness during pregnancy pose a significant risk of miscarriage. Her Grace, being knowledgeable in medicine, was fully aware of this risk. I cannot administer any treatment, she refuses. Damien's mother, standing nearby, looked horrified. Damien, can't you see? Chloe values the life of the child within her more than her own. Do you still not understand that? I have no intention of losing my wife over this, Damien growled, his voice tight with frustration. And I know that my child is not so fragile. Bring me the medicine immediately, he ordered, holding Chloe's hand in anger. Late at night, Chloe stirred awake. Damien, she called softly, waking him as he rested his head beside her. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice tender as he gently squeezed her hand and caressed her face. I had a dream about my mother, she began. Until now, I had only heard her voice. But this time, I saw her. She gave me a handful of forget-me-nots, just like she used to when I was a child. The petals were blue, like your eyes, Chloe added, her gaze soft as she held his face. I wonder if our child's eyes will be like yours or mine. Perhaps my mother was trying to tell me. Damien smiled faintly but remained focused. You need to recover first, Chloe. Let's not rush ahead, he said, handing her a cup of medicine. What is this? Chloe asked, frowning slightly. You need to drink it, he replied, calm but firm. Chloe hesitated, feeling lightheaded. No, she said quietly. I won't. I don't want to force you, Chloe, Damien said, his voice tightening with concern. But if you refuse again, I'll have no choice. I won't take anything that could harm our baby, Chloe insisted, her voice resolute. Damien sighed, steadying his emotions. If you don't take it, you will die, Chloe. How dare you? Chloe snapped, her eyes blazing with anger. How dare you force this poison down my throat? Poison that could kill our child. There's no guarantee the child will die from this. Many women have taken the drug and still carried to term. But you must live, so our child has a chance, he pleaded, gripping her shoulders. Trust me. A child of this won't die so easily. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but before she could protest, Damien poured the medicine into his mouth and kissed her, ensuring she swallowed. I've never failed, and I won't now, he thought to himself, determined. I'll shoulder your sorrow and bring you happiness again. But first, you must live. One morning, Lady Thisse inquired about Chloe's condition. How is she? She asked Margaret as they walked through the hallway. Since she woke up, she's been working on her embroidery, Margaret replied, her tone cautious. It's the only way she knows to distract herself, Lady Thisse remarked. She's so composed. It's almost unsettling, Margaret added, causing Lady Thisse to pause in thought. Her calm exterior is only a mask, Lady Thisse murmured. How could she possibly forget the pain of losing her child? I can only pray the Lord grants Chloe and Damien one more chance. Meanwhile, Chloe stood at the window, staring at the falling snow, lost in thought. Chloe, Duke Damien's voice broke the silence as he embraced her from behind. Once you've recovered, we should depart for Swain together. Chloe didn't turn to face him. It was the dead of winter when I first arrived here, she said quietly. And it seems it will once again be winter as I leave. I will forever remember this place for its chill. Damien tensed. You've lived through all 4 seasons here, but it seems winter has left the deepest impression, he noted, his voice tight. Indeed, Chloe responded with a faint smile. It felt interminable. Swain's winters aren't as harsh, he said, trying to offer comfort. The warmer climate should lift your spirits. Chloe was silent for a moment. Then, with a calmness that belied the weight of her words, she spoke. When we arrive in Swain, I intend to file for divorce. Damien froze, his hands slipping from her shoulders. What? He asked, his voice barely audible, shock evident in his eyes. I'm asking for a divorce, Your Grace, Chloe said, her voice steady but cold. The room fell into a heavy silence, the quiet snowfall outside only amplifying the tension between them. What gives you the right to bring up divorce? Damien asked, his voice low but sharp. I remember you telling me we would have only one child, Chloe replied, her tone controlled but distant. You said no more children would come to us. Now that you have no heir, I assumed you would want a divorce. Chloe Von Thisse, Duke Damien said, his eyes cold. Don't call me that. Chloe shouted, her voice breaking. You deceived me, pushed me to the brink, and made me risk our child's life. I should never have taken that medicine, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands as her walking cane clattered to the floor. Chloe. Damien's voice softened, but his words were firm. If you hadn't taken the medicine, you wouldn't have survived. Then you should have let me die. She cried, her tears flowing freely. My child was the only real thing I had in this place full of lies. I did it to save your life because I love you, he said quietly, his hand resting on her shoulder. After everything I've done to keep you by my side, you can't leave me now. Chloe looked at him in shock. You have no right to speak of love. No, he countered, his voice steady, his hand now at her neck. You have no right to assume what I feel. This is my way of loving you, Chloe Von Thisse. I've never wanted a love like this, she said, her voice shaking. Are you sure? He asked, his gaze intense. Can you truly say I don't occupy your mind and soul? You did, Chloe admitted, her voice cold, until the night I discovered your secrets. Don't be ridiculous, Chloe, he said dismissively. Those documents were nothing. If they were truly important, I would have burned them the moment you told me you loved me. I should never have left you alone here. What a fool I was, he muttered, leaning his head against her shoulder. I made mistakes, Chloe. But I love you. He pulled her closer, and they kissed. When they broke apart, his voice was resolute. Divorce will never be part of my life. And it won't be part of yours either. I know you love me, he tells her. Yes, Chloe whispered, her voice heavy with regret. All of this happened because I loved you. And I regret it deeply, she said, tears filling her eyes. No, Chloe. You will not regret it. I will make sure of that, Damien said, his voice unwavering as he held her gaze. Moments later, they were lost in each other, Damien kneeling before her, planting soft kisses as Chloe's face flushed with warmth. Chloe, you're the only woman who can bring me to my knees, he murmured, pausing for a breath. Chloe's mind swirled as their lips met again, but her thoughts lingered in conflict. I once said with certainty that if I cannot forgive, I cannot love. But what am I to do when I find myself unable to forgive someone I've already fallen for? If love and hatred can't coexist, then what am I supposed to do? Their passionate moment was abruptly interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. My lord. The butler burst into the room, voice breathless. An urgent message has arrived. The citizens of Swain have started a rebellion, and Prince Johannes's whereabouts are unknown. Damien pulled away from Chloe, his expression hardening. I must leave for Swain at once. You are to stay here and protect the Duchess until I return, he ordered, standing to face the butler. Yes, my lord, the butler responded quickly. Chloe grabbed Damien's hand, her voice trembling with desperation. Please, let me come with you. I don't want to be left here alone amidst this turmoil. No, Damien said sharply, pulling his hand away. It wouldn't be fitting for the future queen to be seen with divorce papers in hand. I will do no such thing, Chloe replied, her voice calm but pained. Without responding, Damien turned to the butler. Tell the staff that until I give express permission, the Duchess is not to leave this castle. He threw his cloak over his shoulders and left the room without another glance, leaving Chloe standing there, tears silently streaming down her face as she watched him go. Two men conversed in the streets of Thisse. I heard Duke Thisse quelled the rebellion as soon as he reached Swain. With the prince missing, it seems likely the Duke will take the throne, one man said. The other nodded. That would be ideal. He's known for mingling with commoners and even married a woman from a low-ranking noble family. The first man added, he might be the only one who can fix this broken system. The Duchess is very fortunate. The second man agreed. Indeed, going from a humble noble's daughter to queen is enviable. She must have been truly blessed to have such fortune, the first man concluded. Meanwhile, Margaret and Chloe strolled through the woods. Are you not cold, my lady? Margaret asked. The fresh air is nice. I was getting tired of being indoors. Thank you for suggesting this walk, Margaret. You're such a kind person, Chloe replied, making Margaret blush. I'm only trying to be better because you are my lady, Margaret said softly as they continued walking. You haven't given up on becoming an actress once we moved to Swain, have you? Chloe asked. Margaret hesitated. Do you really think someone as shy as me could do that? Chloe smiled. Absolutely. The day you take the stage, I'll be in the front row cheering for you. She brushed a strand of Margaret's hair aside, her eyes warm. My lady. Margaret's voice trembled. Don't cry, Chloe reassured her with a smile. Actually, I had another reason for suggesting this walk, Margaret said, wiping her eyes. Oh? What's that? Chloe paused. You have a visitor. I thought it might lift your spirits. Chloe turned to see who it was, her eyes widening. Gillis, she said, looking shocked. They made their way to Gillis' former cottage. You look quite distinguished, Gillis, like a clergyman from distant lands, Chloe remarked, commenting on his attire. Gillis rubbed his head. The monk's robe doesn't quite suit me, does it? No, it suits you nicely. I mean it, she replied with a soft smile. Margaret told me how you've been faring, Gillis said, scratching his head slightly. I'm all right, Gillis. You must have been worried, Chloe reassured him, her expression calm. My lady, do you know why I helped Lady Alice escape? He asked, fidgeting with his fingers. I imagine it was because she begged you with tear-filled eyes? Chloe guessed. Lady Alice said, What am I to do, Gillis? I want to be happy, he recalled, his voice filled with the memory of her pleading. Chloe nodded knowingly. That does sound like something she would say. Gillis clenched his fists, his face growing serious. Lady Chloe, I can offer the same to you. He hesitated, then continued, I've thought about it for a long time. If you were content here, I would have stayed silent until the day I die. But, he faltered before Chloe gently interrupted. You've come to realize something, she said, her eyes steady. The Duke of Thisse had a scheme in mind when he approached you. You've no idea the method he used to get you. Gillis, there is no secret in the world that can be hidden forever, Chloe called softly, halting his speech. Gillis stared at her, perplexed. My lady, did you already know? Did you forgive him, even knowing the truth? He asked, his voice filled with awe. Chloe sighed. I loathed him so intensely that it was almost unbearable. But strangely, I felt no resentment toward our child. As much as I despised the name, I found myself wishing to give our child the name of House Thisse. Her voice was measured, reflecting on the past. I must be as worldly as the next person, she added quietly. Please don't say such things. You merely wanted what was best for your child, Gillis said, trembling slightly, his hands clenched in frustration. Yes, though none of it matters now, Chloe said softly. Gillis suddenly stood, walking toward her. Lady Chloe, if you wish, I can free you from this endless winter. Please, run away with me, he pleaded, his voice filled with urgency as he knelt before her. I came here to say this, even knowing the Duke might kill me for it. And I am aware that someone with origins as humble as mine has no right to harbor such feelings, Gillis said, his voice heavy, as tears welled in his eyes. Chloe looked at him with calm understanding. Yet, seeing your profound unhappiness makes me feel as though I am withering away, Gillis continued, his emotion palpable. Please, please run away with me, he begged, tears falling. Gillis, thank you, Chloe said softly, wiping away his tears as she knelt beside him. You risked your life to come here and ask me to leave with you. This moment, this gesture of risking everything to confess your love. The romance of this gesture, I'll never forget it. She smiled gently. But your face is ice cold. Let me make you some tea, she said, standing up. Before she could move, Gillis reached out, gently holding her back. Will I never be worthy of you? He asked, his voice trembling, his head bowed in despair. Chloe knelt again and took his hand. Gillis, listen to me. If I relied on your kindness now, I would spend the rest of my life consumed by guilt. And you, Gillis, would never find true happiness. You're not the kind of man who holds someone by force. You're the type who would rather preserve someone's world than destroy it, she said, letting go of his hand as his eyes filled with emotion. Gillis sighed, the tension easing from his face. There's no arguing with you, Lady Chloe. You didn't even try, Chloe teased with a laugh, making Gillis smile as he sniffled. Please, promise me one thing, my lady. Promise me you'll be happy, Gillis asked, his voice soft but pleading. I will, Gillis. And remember this, whatever choice I make it will be mine of my own volition, she replied, smiling warmly. I'll remember, he said, his gaze lingering on her as if trying to hold on to the moment. As Gillis left the cottage, Chloe's words echoed in his mind. Gillis, I will find happiness. Later, in her study, Chloe penned a letter. This truly is the end. My dearest Lord Duke, I have had ample time to reflect during your absence. I now realize how childishly stubborn I've been, allowing my grief to overshadow you. At the busy train station, Duke Damien noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Isn't that Eliza? He thought, noting how well she seemed to be doing. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out Chloe's letter. Chloe will be pleased to hear the news, he thought, holding the letter close. Though I know my concern is unwarranted, I felt compelled to pick up my pen out of fear that your goals would be compromised because of me. I hope that you will successfully settle all matters and allow me to join you by your side soon. You are the sole person who can validate me. I love you, Damien. I pray that I have not become your source of weakness. Eagerly awaiting the world you will shape, Chloe, Duke Damien read, finishing the letter. He stood for a moment, holding the paper as if absorbing its weight. Yes, Chloe, he thought, a rare softness in his expression. It does not matter whether you are being sincere or if this is deception. You will always be the only one for me, the sovereign of this nation. And I, too, will be the only one for you. We can now be happy, free of all worry. That is enough. So, Chloe, we can start afresh now, he mused, feeling a sense of certainty as he made his way to his estate. But tragedy struck elsewhere. A sudden fire had broken out at the cottage where Chloe stayed in the woods. Hurry, everyone. You must hurry. Slaves shouted, rushing with buckets of water in a desperate attempt to douse the flames. The fire raged fiercely, uncontrollable despite their efforts. Duke Damien arrived, walking steadily, his face stern as the chaos unfolded. What is happening? He demanded, his voice sharp with anger. My lord, the cottage caught fire, a trembling maid stammered, her face pale. And her grace. She is still inside. Damien's steps faltered. The words sank in slowly, painfully. Chloe? He asked, his voice cracking, his eyes fixed on the burning cottage, the terror beginning to take hold. Damien stood at the edge of the chaos, the flames consuming the cabin. Servants held him back, their voices pleading, my lord, you mustn't go in. But their words were lost on him as he fought to break free, his heart pounding with each shout of Chloe's name. Let go of me, he yelled, shaking them off before rushing towards the inferno. Chloe! His voice cut through the roar of the flames. Entering the burning structure, the heat wrapped around him, but he didn't care. His eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on her still form. His breath caught in his throat. What are you doing? His voice trembled as he approached her. Chloe, it's time to get up. Aren't you going to welcome me with open arms? Isn't that your duty as my wife? We have so much to discuss. You can't leave me like this. The rain came suddenly, drenching the scene, quelling the flames. But Damien barely noticed, cradling Chloe's lifeless body in his arms, his tears mingling with the downpour. You promised, Chloe. You belong to me, forever. A soft voice interrupted him. Damien, his mother stood at the doorway, shielding her face from the stench of burnt wood and flesh. Her eyes widened when she saw him holding Chloe. Oh, Chloe, her voice broke with grief. Why are you calling for my wife, mother? Damien's voice was distant, hollow. She would never die like this. Not Chloe. Not the Duchess of Thisse. A weak smile tugged at his lips, but his tears betrayed him. The servants wept quietly, their sorrow palpable. Damien's scream of anguish pierced the air, but then there was only silence. Later in his room, Damien sat slumped in his chair, staring at their portrait, the weight of her absence crushing him. You can't escape me, Chloe. Not even in death. I won't let you. His mother entered quietly, holding a telegram. Damien, a message from Verdier. The Viscount has fallen ill. Will he miss the funeral then? Damien asked flatly, not looking up. My dear, should we not lay Chloe to rest in her birthplace as a final act of love? His mother suggested gently. What do you mean, mother? His voice tightened. She is a queen. She belongs in the royal crypt. He stood, his expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. The queen's funeral will take place after the coronation. I'll return to Swain. See to things here, and then join me. As he left the room, his mother lingered, her eyes drawn to the portrait of Chloe, her heart heavy with grief, but knowing Damien's pain ran deeper than any words could heal. She stood before the fireplace, the memory of her conversation with Chloe fresh in her mind. Chloe, did it not hurt when Damien gripped your hand so tightly? She had asked her once. Chloe had looked at her with a soft, sad smile. Yes, mother. That is why I let go of his hand. At the bustling Thisse station, the day of the fire. The station was alive with chaos, travelers rushing to catch the departing train, their movements hurried and frantic. Winesbury, the train to Winesbury is about to depart. A coachman called out, his voice rising above the clamor of the crowd. People surged forward, pushing and shoving to secure their place. Stop pushing. You nearly knocked over an old woman. Eliza scolded, her sharp voice cutting through the commotion as she helped guide someone cloaked in mystery toward the train. Are you all right? It's far too crowded here, Eliza asked, concern in her voice. I'm fine, thank you for your help, Eliza, came the reply, and as the cloak slipped back, Chloe's face was revealed. Eliza's expression softened. It's nothing compared to the kindness you've shown me, my lady. I don't know how much help I can be, but if you ever need assistance, please write to me, she said, holding Chloe's hands with affection and a touch of worry. The final call for Winesbury echoed through the air as the train prepared to leave. You must board now, Eliza urged. Chloe hesitated for a moment, her gaze distant as though she were addressing someone far away. Damien, you lost. I hope you like my gift. In the perfect world you are building, my absence, as imperfect as I am, won't matter, she thought, her heart heavy but resolute. Without another word, she turned and boarded the train, leaving Thisse behind. The station faded into the distance, and with it, Chloe's connection to the world she had once known. The tumultuous spring passed, and summer arrived. Damien Ernst von Thisse took a solemn oath before God, pledging his life to the prosperity of Swanton. At the same time, a substantial reward was offered for the capture of Prince Johannes, who had fled the kingdom. Thus began the reign of the Thisse dynasty. Do you think Johannes has sought refuge in the Duchy of Carter? Lord Wyse asked, seated across from Damien in the royal library as they flipped through books. Yes, undoubtedly. He wouldn't have been able to escape on his own, Damien replied quietly, his gaze downcast. They say the new king of Carter is completely mad. Apparently, he shot one of his own men just for insulting his lover. If someone like that decides to align with Johannes, Wyse trailed off. If he's mad, we can only hope he's a fool too. Otherwise, Damien smirked, his eyes distant. We'll have a war on our hands. Wyse watched him in disbelief. How can he speak so lightly of such things? He thought. Then, gathering his resolve, he asked, if I may, when do you plan to hold Her Majesty's funeral? 2 months have passed. Surely, you know the palace is filled with prying eyes. Damien paused his writing but did not turn. After a moment, he rose and walked toward the window. What makes you think I don't enjoy sleeping next to a coffin? He said, his back to Wyse. Your Majesty, Wyse hesitated, but his tone was firm. That's no jest. I cannot serve a mad king. Damien's gaze remained fixed on the window. If you don't wish to witness true madness, then I suggest you leave me, he said quietly. Wyse remained seated, his voice calm. Damien, you know better than anyone that your current state is far from normal. Please, act like yourself. Like a Thisse. But Damien remained silent, staring out into the distance, lost in a world only he could see. The funeral will be held in 10 days, Damien said, facing Lord Wyse, ending the conversation. 10 days later, Chloe's body was laid to rest in the royal garden. From the castle window, Duke Damien watched the grave, rain pouring down outside, shrouding the night in gloom. Here lies Chloe, beloved of Damien, he thought bitterly. How do you feel, being buried in the very place where you promised to do anything for me? Do you consider it an insult? Are you angry with me? His mind replayed memories of her, vivid and piercing. You would have looked beautiful even while admonishing me. If only I had brought you with me to Swain. If only I hadn't left you alone in this. If only I had realized my feelings sooner and proposed. His thoughts grew darker. Then maybe instead of this urge to slit my own throat in defeat, I could be kissing your delicate neck, indulging in bliss. A gentle knock interrupted his brooding. Your Majesty, his steward called. What is it? Damien asked, his voice dull. A delivery from the Thisse post office, the steward said as he entered. They're stamps that Her Ladyship, Her Majesty, personally commissioned before the accident. Damien looked stunned but quickly regained composure. I see. You may leave. He opened the envelope slowly, revealing its contents, a postcard with a picture of them together. His heart clenched as memories of that day flooded back, the day he had gotten soaked in the rain because of a postcard. In a fit of anguish, Damien hurled the cup in his hand to the floor, shattering it. He dropped to his knees beside the broken glass, his hand bleeding as he gripped a shard tightly. Chloe, if I were to die, would I be reunited with you? He whispered, clutching the glass. What a morbid joke, Damien, a voice said softly, as a figure gently took the shard from his hand. That wasn't a joke, he replied, his eyes wide as he stared at what seemed to be Chloe's ghost before him. You know, Damien, the river of death splits into heaven and hell. Surely the Lord would not send us both to the same place. Do you agree? Her voice echoed before fading into the night. Damien sat in silence, his hands covering his face as sobs racked his body. As Count Weiss and Damien walked through the castle grounds one morning, he asked, Did you have an opportunity to review the list I provided yesterday? I glanced at it, Damien replied. What did you think? Count Weiss pressed. Eliminating the leaders of the strikes won't solve the issue, he answered flatly. Pardon? He asked, looking perplexed. There are valid points among their demands, Damien clarified. Your Majesty, I meant the list of potential brides, he replied, halting, watching as Damien turned in his direction. Ah. Damien paused, briefly speechless. I selected women of noble standing and academically distinguished candidates from the university. Half a year has passed, and I believe it's time. Count Weiss was saying when Damien interrupted. Weiss, why don't you choose a bride for me? I'd happily marry the woman selected by my Prime Minister. Count Weiss, startled, replied, Surely, you jest. Yes, it was a jest. But I'll review the list carefully, Damien said, resuming his walk. Please, don't joke about such things, Count Weiss murmured, still holding a small box. Here, take this, he said, offering it to Damien. What is it? He asked. A newly released phonograph with a record of Julien Guillau's music, he replied. I purchased it since you're so fond of Guillau's work. Damien looked at him. Did a merchant swindle you again? He was a merchant from Winsbury, he replied, smiling. I hoped the music would bring you some solace. In his room, Damien listened to the record, memories of Chloe filling his thoughts. He remembered her laughter and her flushed cheeks as they danced in the rain to the same melody, her voice echoing, I want to keep dancing with you. Damien's anger flared. He punched the phonograph, breaking it. No, this isn't right, he muttered, sadness settling over him. In frustration, Damien left his room and walked barefoot into the rain, heading to Chloe's grave. There, he ran his hand over the tombstone, murmuring, No, you cannot sleep eternally. Kneeling, he dug at the earth with his bare hands, shouting, Chloe, even in death, you are mine. Finally, he uncovered her charred remains, noting the necklace she wore. He tore it off, staring at it bitterly. You despised me so, yet you wore the jewels of House Thisse, he muttered. Your Majesty, are you all right? His butler called, rushing over with an umbrella. The list, Damien said abruptly. Pardon? The butler replied, surprised. Bring me the list of all passengers who left Thisse by train that day. I need every name accounted for, Damien ordered, his tone resolute. Though taken aback, the butler nodded. Watching Damien. It doesn't matter if they call me a madman, Damien thought, I will uncover the truth. Even if it consumes the rest of my life. So Chloe, I must find you alive. Your Majesty, Gilles Watteau has arrived, Damien's butler announced one morning. Let him in, Damien replied, holding a cigar. Soon, Gilles was escorted into his study, restrained by guards. Oh dear, for someone devoted to God, You seem rather worn down, Damien remarked with a smirk, noticing Gilles' haggard appearance. Gilles clenched his hands, his face somber. Please, allow me to place flowers at Lady Chloe's grave, he requested. Flowers? That might be difficult, Damien replied, stubbing out his cigar. Why is that? Gilles asked, his tone tense. Because I exhumed her grave, Damien replied, a grin creeping onto his face. You're no man, you're a demon. Gilles shouted, struggling against the guards. You're the one who killed her. His voice broke. Lady Chloe, he called, bowing his head. I wish to speak with Gilles Watteau in private. The rest of you may leave, Damien ordered. The guards hesitated before stepping out, closing the door behind them. Gilles remained on the floor, his fists clenched. How does it feel to have killed her? He asked, his voice thick with anger and grief. You pushed her to the edge, and now you're satisfied? No, not exactly, Damien replied coolly, crouching down, watching as Gilles fought to hold back his tears. Then what is it? What are you smiling about? Gilles demanded, noticing Damien's unsettling expression. So, you genuinely believe Chloe is dead, Damien mused, lightly touching Gilles' chin. He let out a loud, cold laugh, which only deepened Gilles' confusion. What do you mean? Gilles asked, his tension growing. At least this proves Chloe didn't run off with her servant. Yes, my wife was a wise woman, Damien remarked, his expression darkening. Are you out of your mind? Gilles asked, his voice tight. Gilles, shall I tell you a secret? Damien leaned in, his voice a quiet murmur. Chloe isn't dead. Doesn't that make you happy? He said, straightening up. Gilles felt a chill run down his spine. He was never sound of mind, but now, his utterly unhinged, he thought. Denying Lady Chloe's death won't absolve you of your sins. I'll take her remains and bury them in Verdier. I won't leave her alone in this place, he replied. You may do as you wish, Damien replied with a smirk. Because I will bring Chloe back to life. Stunned, Gilles left to retrieve Chloe's remains, lifting her shrouded form from the grave. Damien watched from his study window, lost in thought. Perhaps you foresaw all of this, Chloe, he thought. You must have known I'd eventually question your death and seek out Gilles. You wanted to protect your servant to the end. As he stared, Damien's eyes grew steely. You scorched my heart, Chloe, leaving me to feel this defeat. If this is the judgment you're passing, I'll bear it. But when I find you again, you'll face the consequences. Together, we'll descend into hell. Meanwhile, in a distant, warm village, Chloe walked slowly, aided by a cane. Miss Claire, someone called, drawing her attention. A few days later, at Castle Duke Thisse, Damien assembled the maids for questioning. They stood before him, tense, while he scribbled notes, his gaze keen. So, you were the one who sent Chloe's letters on her behalf? He asked, addressing Margaret. She flinched. Yes, because her ladyship wasn't permitted to leave the castle, she replied, voice quivering. I assume you didn't read the contents, but you must have noticed the addresses, he pressed, pausing his writing. They were polite greetings to her family. Some were sent to your majesty in the capital, she said, hands trembling. It's likely she told her family what was happening, Damien thought. And the Viscount Verdier, collapsed, hospitalized after the fire, still unaccounted for. Even letters from her sister stopped abruptly at some point. When was the last time you saw her alive? He resumed, pen poised. 7 in the evening. She instructed me not to prepare her bed that night, Margaret answered. One last question. How long does it take for a candle to burn out? Pardon? I believe it takes about 4 hours, she replied, confused. He dismissed them, piecing together his suspicions. By 7 in the evening, Chloe had bid her handmaiden farewell. By 9, she had been seen inspecting the items intended for the poorhouse. A maid confirmed that Chloe was alone, having sent her away on another task. After inspecting, she likely prepared the cottage on her own. And the one who assisted her must have been Eliza. Later, in his study, he welcomed Eliza, whose eyes held a sorrowful weight. It's been a while, Eliza, he said. Greetings, Your Majesty, she replied quietly. I wish to question you, not as the King of Swanton, but as the Duke's heir whom you delivered at birth, he told her. Please, proceed, she answered. Where is my wife? He asked. Eliza fell silent, then said, I don't know. Are you being truthful, Eliza? His voice held a sinister edge. "I know well the man I raised," she replied firmly. "I value my life. After you were dismissed from Castle Birch, it was Chloe's recommendation that secured your hospital employment. So, it was you who arranged the transport of the unidentified corpse from the hospital to the castle. As the acting steward, orchestrating the affair would have been simple. No one suspected a corpse among the items for the Duchess to inspect that day, except for her and you. Am I wrong?" Eliza was silent, then nodded. "No, Your Majesty. You're correct. One last chance, Eliza." His voice grew cold. "Where is Chloe?" "I don't know," she repeated. "She didn't tell me." He watched her closely, his brow furrowing. Of course, Chloe wouldn't involve others if it meant putting them in danger. But he remembered seeing her at the train station. "I saw you at the station that day. You knew what she was planning." "I went of my own accord," Eliza admitted. "Yes, I had the body transported to the castle at her request, and I suspected her plan. She tried to flee when she saw me, but I stopped her. I gave her my cloak and covered her face with the hood, then helped her board the train, hoping she would have a safe journey." Damien held his head, sighing deeply. "You must have known she wouldn't return." "Yes," Eliza replied softly. "And you knew I'd never forgive you if I found out. Why help her? Would you understand, young master," she asked, her gaze steady, "if I said it's because I am human?" For a moment, Damien's steely gaze softened, his expression turning to one of confusion. Damien stood alone in his study, opening a hidden safe. Inside lay the braces he had once given Chloe to help her walk. A quiet laugh escaped him, tinged with both disbelief and irony. Chloe Verdier, who had once walked this space, left no trace of her past self. She'd shattered his conviction that her injured leg would keep her tethered. "You knew, didn't you, Chloe?" he mused. "You knew I'd return here one day." Damien could still hear her voice. "You simply come to understand them naturally." He'd once thought it an absurd notion, yet she had understood him better than anyone. Damien clutched the broken brace, his expression darkening. "Did you imagine my fury when you left it here, Chloe? Were you as exhilarated as I am now?" He clenched the brace tighter. "Thank you for breaking me, my love. I hope you'll be ready when the pieces of me return to reclaim you." 1 year later, in Genevois, a town nestled in the southern reaches of Carter, Chloe, now going by Claire, sat with a lady over tea in a castle. "If it weren't for you, Claire, our Sophie might have already eloped and had twins." "I'm so grateful you're her governess," her companion exclaimed. "Sophie is only 10, Chloe replied with a small smile. "It's just a manner of speaking. She's so mischievous, though." The woman laughed. Chloe's gaze softened as she watched Sophie play outside. "Children are like that," she said gently. "I envy you for having such a lively, healthy child." Rain began to patter against the windows. "Oh no, it's raining. Sophie, get inside. You'll catch cold." The lady rushed out, calling for her daughter, leaving Chloe seated, her expression distant. Memories tugged at her, a moment shared with Damien in the rain. A year has passed, and yet, she thought, our separation became inevitable that night. Despite everything, I held on, believing that as long as I had our child, I could endure anything. But when I lost my child, my last hope, if you had any respect for me, you would have apologized and sought my forgiveness when we parted. Her patience had finally reached its breaking point. She remembered leaving her braces in Damien's hidden safe just before faking her death, a last gesture meant to mark the end. Her hand trembled, not with fear, but with a strange, powerful anticipation. "For the first time in my life," she thought, "I felt an overwhelming desire to cause you absolute despair." The ache returned as she remembered her flight, arriving in Winsbury under a new name. "I wonder if Alice received my letter," she thought, gripping her cane. She had asked her sister to meet her on that day. It was the anniversary of their mother's death. As she neared the post office, a man approached. "Duchess Chloe von Thisse?" he asked, and Chloe turned, meeting his gaze. "Lady Alice is waiting for you," he said, gesturing for her to follow. Chloe was guided to a secluded castle to meet her sister. "It's been so long, Chloe. How was your journey here?" called a familiar voice, stopping her at the entrance. Chloe turned, surprised and delighted to see Alice holding a baby. "Alice," she greeted warmly. "Shall we catch up on everything that's happened?" Alice said softly as they made their way inside. In the parlor, While Alice's child played nearby, the sisters reminisced. So, you're telling me that Eddie was not actually a Bohemian but the hidden heir to the Duchy of Carter? Chloe asked, still stunned by the revelation that Eddie was Arnaud de Carter, now the king of the duchy. Alice looked away, fidgeting. Yes, he is king now. Chloe, can you believe it? He tells me he loves me, but he keeps me hidden while staying betrothed to his fiancée. I wish I could just kill him. I pray for his death every day. Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. All I wanted was to be happy. Chloe watched her sister, worry clouding her expression. Later, when she left the castle, her thoughts lingered on Alice's sorrow. She couldn't stay with her. Seeing Alice desperately clinging to the man she claimed to despise, it reminded her too much of my own struggle. Back at her hiding place, Sophie called out, Miss Clare, snapping her out of her thoughts. It's time to go to church. Sophie hugged her, grinning with excitement. There's supposed to be a new missionary today. Yes, Sophie. Let's go, Chloe replied, smiling. As they traveled in the carriage through the rain, Sophie dozed off, her head resting comfortably on Chloe's lap. Across from them, Sophie's mother, Miss Stella, looked out at the downpour and remarked, once the rain clears, the heat will be unbearable. You managed through it last summer, didn't you? Surely you don't enjoy such sweltering days? I actually prefer summer over winter, Chloe said calmly. The lady gave her a surprised look. How unusual. Oh, by the way, have you heard? The King of Swanton is about to marry his new queen. Chloe stiffened. He postponed the late queen's funeral for so long, the woman continued, yet less than a year later, his remarrying. Men are all the same, whether here or in Swanton. Is that what you think? Chloe asked softly, looking out at the rain trickling down the window. The further I fade from their world, the closer I come to my freedom. Her gaze drifted, memories of Damien flooding back. Don't think of it. My life starts anew here. A peaceful life, far from him. Suddenly, the carriage came to a stop. The rear wheel is stuck in a pothole. The coachman announced, stepping out to assess. I'm afraid you'll need to walk the rest of the way. So, they set out on foot, umbrellas shielding them from the downpour. They soon reached a small bridge where rainwater rushed over the stones. Oh dear, how will we cross? Sophie's mother fretted. Go on ahead. I'll manage, Chloe assured her. You can hold my hand, miss. Sophie offered, her voice full of care. Chloe's expression softened. I don't want you to fall, Sophie. Just let me know if you spot any wobbly stones, Chloe replied with a gentle smile. Okay, Sophie said brightly. With careful steps, the mother and daughter crossed, balancing on the stones. Someone has kindly arranged these rocks for people to use as a path, the woman thought. It's safe up to here. Sophie called back to Chloe, waving her forward. Chloe clutched her umbrella tightly, taking a steadying breath. You've endured far worse. You can manage this, she told herself. As she stepped forward, a hand suddenly reached out from the water, steadying her. Startled, Chloe looked down to see a familiar face. Please be careful, it's slippery, the man said, head bowed as rain dripped from his hair. Chloe's face softened, tears forming in her eyes as she recognized Gilles. She extended her umbrella toward him, shielding him from the rain. You must be the new missionary, she said quietly. Will you hold my hand? Gilles looked up, hesitating. I am afraid my hands are too soiled for that. That's not true. It's all right, so please take my hand, Chloe whispered, offering her hand to him. The next day, Chloe's host shared her thoughts with her husband over tea. Are you certain? Her husband asked, raising a brow. Yes. I'm telling you, Miss Stella replied, skimming the newspaper. What a surprise. The way she usually looks at men, you'd think they were just stone statues, he said with a chuckle. I couldn't believe it myself. I've never seen her smile so brightly. If things work out between Claire and that young missionary, maybe they'll settle here in Genevois, she said, giggling. Just then, something in the paper caught her eye. Oh, heavens above. She gasped, nearly causing her husband to burn his tongue on his tea. What's wrong? He asked, startled. The king has announced he'll marry his mistress. Apparently, they already have a child together. She exclaimed. Do we truly have to accept a woman from Swanton as our queen? Speaking of Swanton, about our villa by the lake, her husband began carefully. Would you mind if Laurent Taylor stayed there? Laurent Taylor? The gramophone businessman from Swanton? She asked, sounding puzzled. If he's from Swanton, I'm not so sure, she added, looking displeased. You seem perfectly fine with our governess, he replied, sulking. That's an entirely different matter, she said dismissively. He plans to arrive just in time for the bazaar in 3 days. He's quite a shrewd businessman, so building some rapport with him couldn't hurt. She sighed. I suppose it couldn't hurt. But anyway, I wonder how Claire's day is going. In the city, Chloe sat quietly, her thoughts interrupted by Gilles' arrival. Smiling, he held out a flower. Were you waiting long, my lady? No, not long at all, she replied, feeling her cheeks warm. As they walked together, she looked around. This place is so different from where we grew up, isn't it? Yes, he replied softly. Here, people truly live in the moment, focusing on finding joy rather than worrying about tomorrow. After a pause, he asked, Are you happy here? She studied his face. I've returned from the brink of death. Yes, I am happy, she said, looking away. Gilles gazed at her, his eyes moist. That's all I needed to hear. You're still as emotional as ever, Gilles, she teased gently. I'm not crying, he protested. Then why are your eyes so red? She replied with a smile. Later, Chloe sat with the flowers he'd given her resting in her lap, lost in thought. She remembered a promise she'd made to Damien at a festival long ago. One day, I'll bring you flowers like those women over there. I look forward to it, he had replied. Not once has a woman given me flowers. Her reverie was interrupted by Gilles as he returned to sit beside her. My lady, what are you thinking about? He asked. Oh, Chloe replied, glancing at him. I was just admiring these flowers you gave me. They're just wildflowers from the riverside, he said, his cheeks flushed. Gilles, she asked, what led you to become a missionary? I didn't realize you had such an interest in theology. He sat up straighter. I wanted to understand why humans suffer. When I heard about your death, I was overcome with guilt. I kept thinking I should have acted, that I should have run away with you when I had the chance. I know you once told me that whatever happens, it will have been a decision made by your own free will. Yet I didn't even think to doubt your death, he tells her. She spoke softly, almost absent-mindedly. I wanted you to believe I was gone. What? He asked, startled. If you had known I was alive, you would never have given up. You would have tried to save me, even at the risk of your life. I couldn't bear the thought of those I love getting hurt. So, that's how things turned out, and as a result, I am happy, she said, her voice calm and steady. Gilles' expression softened as he took her words in. Meanwhile, Damien rode in a carriage disguised as a merchant, making his way to Winsbury, his destination set. That night, Chloe placed the flowers Gilles had given her in a vase. Gilles is as warm-hearted as ever. He's truly suited to be a missionary, she thought, a hand resting over her heart. A knock sounded at the door. May I come in? The lady of the house asked, peeking in as she opened the door a bit. Of course, Chloe replied. I'm sorry to disturb you so late. I finally have a moment now that my husband and the children are asleep, the lady said, sitting on the bed beside Chloe. So, tell me, how was your date with the handsome missionary? She asked with a grin. Pardon? I wouldn't really call it a date, but it was pleasant, Chloe said, a bit flustered. Please, it was obvious he was smitten with you from the start. And think about it, Claire, a pastor's future is stable. What better match could there be? You might think I'm being silly, but I truly wish for your happiness, the lady replied, warmly. Chloe stifled a laugh. The idea of marrying Gilles is outlandish, she thought. Why are you laughing? Miss Stella asked, looking puzzled. Oh, I'm just not quite ready to think about marriage yet, Chloe replied. Is that so? Well, don't overthink it, Claire. There's only one thing to consider, she said, resting her hand on Chloe's. And what would that be? Chloe asked, curious. When you're with him, does your heart begin to race? She asked. If it does, what else could possibly matter? She added teasingly. Chloe let out a soft sigh. Yes, I suppose you're right. A few days later, Chloe accompanied Sophie and Miss Stella to the bazaar festival. Miss, look what I got. I wish we could have a bazaar every day, Sophie exclaimed, proudly showing off her prize. Now, where on earth did he go? Sophie's mother muttered distractedly, looking around. Claire, could you watch Sophie for a moment? I need to find my husband. Of course, Chloe replied, watching Sophie as they explored the carnival together. After a while, Sophie tugged at Chloe's sleeve. Miss Claire, look at this. Isn't it pretty? She asked, holding up a music box. Yes, it's beautiful, Chloe murmured, leaning in. There's a forest inside. What kind of trees are those? Sophie asked. Those are birch trees, Chloe said softly, her gaze distant. Birch trees? Sophie repeated, intrigued. Oh. Do you think it'll play music? Why don't you try turning the key? Chloe suggested gently. As the melody played, Chloe's eyes widened, her heart catching in her throat. Memories of dancing with Damien to that very tune flashed through her mind. Why did it have to be this melody? She thought, gripping her cane tightly. Claire. I finally found him. Miss Stella called out, waving at Chloe from afar. You've no idea how far I had to search. She added as she approached with a familiar figure in tow. My apologies, Claire. He insisted on greeting the guests staying at our villa, the lady said. Oh, and he's from Swanton. Allow me to introduce you. Claire, this gentleman is Laurent Taylor, a merchant from Swanton. The man removed his cap, glancing at Chloe. Her heart raced, and she froze as she recognized him. I beg your pardon for keeping you waiting, he said. Though it seems I'm a tad late. It was Damien von Thiste, her husband and the King of Swanton. Chloe stood, her tension palpable, eyes wide with shock. As they stood facing each other, Chloe's heart beat faster. Damien's gaze held an intense, unreadable look that sent a shiver down her spine. How did he find me? She wondered, her face tense. A pleasure to meet you, Damien said, extending his hand. Chloe, he added softly, his eyes briefly meeting hers. Miss Stella chuckled as they joined the festivities. No matter how many times I tell him it's Claire, he seems to keep mixing up your name. I hope you're not too offended, she remarked to Chloe, oblivious to the tension. He says he's in the music business. Though I'm not particularly fond of artistic types, I must admit he did contribute generously to today's festivities. Maybe that's why my husband welcomed him so warmly, she continued, her attention shifting to Sophie. Sophie, dear, don't touch that. Chloe was in a daze, barely registering the bustling crowd around her. I never doubted he would suspect my death. In fact, I was sure he would. Her eyes drifted to Damien, who was mingling effortlessly with the guests, but his gaze flicked back to her. But as time went by, I thought perhaps I had been erased from his world. She bit her lip, thinking. It seems he's already figured everything out. So then, why is he playing along? He's not one to leave escape routes. He calculates, watches for every weakness, and strikes at the right moment. Miss Stella, if you don't mind, I'd be happy to take Sophie home for you, Chloe said, eager for a chance to leave. Oh, you can't go just yet, Claire. Look, that young missionary's been watching you for a while now, Miss Stella replied, gesturing towards Gilles, who had just arrived. Ah, he's here, Chloe murmured, her unease growing as she noticed Gilles standing not far from Damien. Damien, holding his glass, remained focused on Chloe, not acknowledging Gilles' arrival. Why does he look so pleased? She thought, feeling a pang of unease. Claire, aren't you going to dance with him? Miss Stella teased. Well, Chloe stammered, glancing at Gilles, whose expression grew tense. Oh, come now, Claire. You mustn't leave without dancing even once. Miss Stella urged. If I reveal my connection to Gilles here, Chloe's mind raced as she remembered the conflict between Damien and Gilles in the past, a memory that still chilled her. I should go. Rising from her seat, she turned to Miss Stella. I think it's best if I leave now. Oh, but, Miss Stella began, looking disappointed, until Damien appeared beside their table. If it's not too much trouble, would you honor me with the first dance? He asked, offering his hand, his smile almost gentle. Or must I wait my turn? Chloe's heart pounded. Not at all. No one else has asked me to dance, however. I'm afraid I may step on your feet, she replied, clutching her cane. If it's you, Miss Chloe, I wouldn't mind being stepped on, he replied softly, unfazed. Miss Stella's expression soured. Good heavens, it's Claire. And can't you see her cane? Damien's hand remained extended. Chloe, meeting his eyes, steadied her cane by the table. She limped forward to take his hand but accidentally stepped on Sophie's toy, losing her balance. Damien caught her swiftly, his arm wrapping firmly around her waist. Her heart raced as he held her close. My love, have you been enjoying yourself in a world without me? He murmured, his gaze locking with hers. The ballroom was alive with music and laughter as couples danced, the warm glow of chandeliers casting a lively energy across the room. My love, you still haven't answered my question, Damien murmured, noticing Chloe's silence as they moved in rhythm. She looked away from him. Your Grace, how would you answer it? He raised her hand slightly. I asked first, Duchess, he pressed, his eyes glinting with intrigue. Chloe held his gaze reluctantly. I quite enjoyed it, she replied. Is that so? He lifted her hand higher, as if sealing her answer. Then there's truly nothing more thrilling than living in disguise, is there? Like how your sister was charmed by that so-called bohemian, Eddie. Or perhaps how Carter felt when he learned of that stable boy who masqueraded as a pastor to bury his past. Damien's words forced her gaze toward Gilles, who stood nearby, watching them. He already knows everything, she thought, seeing Damien's sly smile as he twirled her, shifting their positions. Now, as for your question, he continued smoothly, after you set my heart ablaze and disappeared, how do you think I felt? He leaned in, his breath warm against her neck. Chloe tried to pull back, but he tightened his hold. Wait. Stop, please, she nearly shouted, her voice breaking the rhythm. My love, he whispered, drawing back with a faintly sinister smile. What's on your mind? You're driving me mad with curiosity. She drew a shaky breath. Did you come here to kill me? His eyes flashed with amusement. Kill you? Heavens. No. Making you suffer would be much more effective, wouldn't it? Like, if I wiped out your precious new family, the ones treating a queen as an ordinary woman would hurt you so much more, wouldn't it? His voice was chilling. Is that another threat? She asked, voice tense. It seems you misunderstand me, Chloe, he replied, his grip tightening slightly. Misunderstand? Then what do you mean? She demanded, her voice low but bold. His tone dropped. Do you think I'm playing games? I came here alone, without guards. Does that look like a game to you? Just then, the lights flickered, drawing everyone's attention. Chloe's breath quickened as Damien steered her to a quiet corner, her back against the wall. I don't know what you're thinking, Damien. I never have, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I know I don't want you destroying my life again. I didn't come here to destroy it, he said, stepping closer. Then why? She asked, her voice wavering with anger. The lights went out, casting the hall in darkness. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, and someone called out, It'll be back soon, just stay calm. In the shadows, Damien leaned close to her ear. Because I missed you. I wanted to see you, to dance with you, to speak to you. His hand brushed her cheek. Stop that. She protested, her heart racing. Stop what? His fingers tilted her chin, bringing her face toward his. This? He kissed her, and her body tensed, caught off guard as his lips lingered. Just as the lights flickered back on, Chloe pulled away, breathless and flushed. Claire, are you all right? Miss Stella exclaimed, watching her limp to the table. My apologies. I'm not feeling well. I think it's best I leave, Chloe said, her voice trembling. Of course, let me help you, Miss Stella replied, taking her arm as they left. Damien watched them from a distance, his expression cool and unreadable. He recalled the night before, when Count Weiss had pleaded, Your Majesty, it's too dangerous to go to the duchy alone. Your face is all over the papers. Don't worry. I look much better in person than in those photographs, Damien replied casually. At least take a guard. Weiss urged. And risk war? Damien retorted. If I'd planned that, I'd have abducted her the moment I found her. I'm not foolish enough to repeat the same mistake. So what are you planning? Weiss asked, concern clear in his eyes. Damien turned to the window, watching the rain pour down. I plan to bring her back willingly. She'll remember that I am already part of her world. And if she refuses? Weiss asked. Damien's expression darkened. Then Swanton will have a new king once again. Weiss went silent. What do you mean by that, sire? That if she rejects me, I'll return to her the last gift she ever gave me. Damien pulled a necklace from his pocket, brushing it against his lips. I'm a man who believes in fair exchanges. Chloe is no exception. Back in her room, Chloe was disheveled as she parked her box down, her room in disarray. Damien's words from earlier that night echoed in her mind. I didn't come to destroy your world. I came because I've missed you. I wanted to see you, to speak to you, to dance with you. Her heart began to race, her cheeks flushing as she froze. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Miss Claire? Sophie called, prompting Chloe to turn. Sophie? What's wrong? She asked, noticing the child's teary eyes and sniffled nose. Are you leaving without saying goodbye? Did I do something wrong? Sophie asked, her voice trembling, causing Chloe to flinch. No, of course not. There. I'm not going anywhere, Chloe reassured her as she crawled toward the child, holding her gently. But then, why is the room so messy? Sophie asked, her gaze lingering around the room. I was just trying to clean it, Chloe explained. You've seen me do this often, haven't you? She added, hoping to calm Sophie. Sophie sniffled and then hugged Chloe, catching her off guard. It's all right, Sophie, Chloe whispered, stroking her hair. This is my peaceful world, one that I've finally created just for me. Without him, she thought, her heart steadying. I will not let anyone destroy it. I won't make the same mistake twice, Damien. Your certainty that I still love you, your arrogance in thinking I'll crumble and come back to you. It will all be destroyed. I'll make it right. The next morning, Chloe tensed as she stepped out of the cottage and saw Damien talking with Miss Stella. What else can we do? I'm terribly sorry, Claire. He was supposed to leave today, but something urgent came up in town, Miss Stella explained. He requested a tour guide, and he's asked for you specifically. But I'm afraid I don't know enough about Genevois to guide you, Chloe replied, her tone polite but firm. Don't think of it as guiding him around, Claire, Miss Stella said, trying to sound cheerful. Rather, you'll be keeping him company. She reached toward Chloe with a small laugh. I'm really sorry. He specifically requested that you accompany him because you two get along so well. He's an important guest. Could you help him out just this once? She whispered to Chloe. Damien, watching from a distance, remained silent, his face calm. Chloe looked at him, her expression tense. I suppose I have no other choice, she sighed. Oh, thank you, Claire. Miss Stella exclaimed happily. Chloe grabbed her purse and walked toward Damien. Goodness, thank you for accepting my invitation, he said, his voice sincere. You're welcome, she replied, her tone serious. I'm always happy to help Mr. and Mrs. Ricardo's esteemed guests. Mr. Taylor, she added, noticing his face flush slightly. Very well. Shall we go? Damien asked, taking her hand gently. Miss Stella watched them leave for the carriage, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Oh my. They look so natural together, she thought, watching them closely. The carriage rattled through the streets, the woods surrounding them in silence. Beautiful, Damien said, breaking the quiet. Yes. Genevois is a truly lovely place, Chloe replied, quickly turning her gaze to the window. Indeed, he said. It's very idyllic. The perfect place to forget everything, Chloe remarked, her voice distant. So, did all the beauty here manage to make you forget the countless moments we shared? He asked softly. What if it did? Chloe replied, her voice steady but cold. If you truly did forget our time in Swain's Rose Garden, that winter among the emerald trees of the Verdier forest, and us kissing on that bridge in Thisse, I won't hold on any longer. I'll let you go, Damien said, his voice almost gentle. Chloe clenched her fists, biting her lip hard. Memories and nostalgia are different, she said, her voice strained but firm. How so? Damien asked, his curiosity piqued. Nostalgia is beautiful. It's a longing for the past that you wish to remember forever. But memories. She paused, her gaze darkening. Memories can be painful, especially if they're hard to forget. Damien's expression hardened. Chloe, if you're implying that not being able to forget me is painful, then what does that make me? Insane? His voice dropped, the sinister edge in his words unmistakable.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. If you enjoyed what you watched, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing that notification bell. Your comments mean the world to us and help us improve. The next episode promises even more excitement and unexpected twists, so stay tuned as we embark on this thrilling journey together. Keep the anticipation alive, and we'll catch you in the next episode.